Welcome everybody to our first TELedvisors webinar for the year for 2024, and welcome to the panel who I'll introduce shortly. Before we start, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of all of the countries where we are located, and I myself am on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I'm at the Australian National University campus today. I would love to now introduce our panelist, and we have 4 people from across the TELedvisor universe here today, each of them with a particular take on the kind of professional development that TELedvisor people, so learning designers, educational technologists, academic developers, and all the other roles that are part of this third space community. So each of these panelists have something different to bring us. Just quickly as an overview, the people who are with us today in the panel are John from University of Technology, Sydney, Stephen Abblitt from Keypath. Hi, Stephen. Jessica Frawley from the University of Sydney, and Colin Simpson. So that's our panel. I set the panel the task of introducing themselves by explaining who they were, their work, but also what professional development opportunities do they feel we should be looking at right now. I guess it may be part of your work, or it may be the next stage in your work that you're presenting. So each of the panelists will do that introduction on those topics, and then as they're speaking, please note down questions you've got, and we'll work through them as they come up after those short introductions. So John, thank you so much. We'll mute, and please introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. So I'm John Vulic. I am a course coordinator at UTS, coordinating a graduate certificate in learning design and related micro-credentials that form part of the course as well, or feed into that particular course. So I'm going to be representing kind of the formal learning approach. And so when I kind of first received this question on the screen, the first thing that kind of came to mind is, oh, they're after a special source. And we put a lot of work into focus groups, interviewing edvisors, learning designers in Australia and internationally, looking at basically what positions are asking for in these roles when they're recruiting. And our kind of special source, is, our teachers and the inherent design of the program and the work that we put into that, and the continuous work that we put into it, and also the students themselves, and the experiences that students can have in the program, and how to kind of best leverage their experiences from a student perspective. So the work that we put into our program ended up with a design like this. We have 8 subjects. They're six weeks each, and these first 7 subjects are also delivered as micro-credentials to learners. In terms of what we've come up with, we believe that learning theories is really important. So in that subject, think, students are introduced to the whole gamut of learning theories, from behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, connectivism, and the impact of these learning theories on learning design. In design, we look at different theories of instruction, like conditions-based theory, constructivist and human performance theories, and how these theories contribute to the development of different models of instruction and learning design. So these are kind of where all the acronyms come in, like ADDIE, UDL, UBD, SAM. Critique is where we looked at really important aspects that we think people in this field need, looking at ethical considerations in learning design, privacy, collection and use of learner data, the context, cultural sensitivity, Copyright is another important aspect in this particular subject. Analyze looks at, evaluating learning that takes place in a course or courseware, different forms of assessment, designing those different forms of assessment, different methods, tools used for assessment, and how to deploy assessment constructively. Crunch looks at, the field of learning and data analytics, something that people in the industry, need to do a bit more of and often don't have time to do, or, are quite challenged in terms of, their time and resource commitments, but still a really important aspect. We look at, analyzing, applying different approaches, techniques used in learner analytics in this particular subject. For Predict, this is where, we have lots of fun in terms of looking at the future of education, critically evaluating emerging trends in e-learning, educational technology. We look at, current developments, machine learning. We look at, AI, virtual reality, augmented reality, gamification, robotics, all those exciting fields, and critiquing those. In Create, students start, developing some really interesting artifacts for their portfolios. And this is where we're looking at, critiquing examples of print, online, visual, audio, multimedia, using a whole gamut of tools to actually create a learning object based on a brief to add to their portfolios. And kind of the course finishes off with this really practical aspect where students can kind of apply their conceptual knowledge of all the things that they've learnt in the course and basically have a work placement or work experience and, work with stakeholders, work with subject matter experts, build their communication skills, their pitching skills. We prepare them for, receiving feedback. And this finally ends with a kind of showcase of student work and what they've created and how they've actually applied their learnings and theories in the course to their final object. Inherent in kind of our design is a real understanding of our learners. Flexibility is a key focus. We have adult learners in our course, and adult learners have priorities. They've got commitments outside of their studies, and we understand that. So we offer our course as micro-credentials. And so someone who's just interested in, learner analytics could just do one of these subjects as a micro-credential, or often we find students do one of these subjects and then they segue into the actual full course. We offer what I call a hybrid HyFlex model. What that means is, all of our resources are available online for learners. We do one live online session each week. It's optional. We don't take attendance for adult learners. Recordings are available to all students after each session. We have a big focus on authenticity. We really use lots of examples from our learners, and we respect that, adults have lots of experiences that they can share and for people to learn from. All of our assessments are what we call 2-for or 2-for-1. And, if we can promote a kind of a 2-for-1 where students can actually do an assessment for their own workplace or to add value to their own workplace and use it to get credit, that's what we kind of, always try and promote. We bring in experts for every subject. At the end of each subject, we have what we call an expression session. And these industry experts share their knowledge, skills, and what it's like on the coalface. And we promote kind of real world experience or real world work experience for students across our subjects. From the students themselves, we can have students getting different experiences. We find, high-performing students who kind of, who are really proactive in the course and try and transfer what they learn in a subject to their workplaces. perform really well, the ones who keep in contact with us. So for example, this picture here is of one of our students, and earlier this year he reached out to myself and our casual academic Mark Perry and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in filming. Would it be possible to review my script?" And said, "Hey, let's do a little mini micro or masterclass for you." And we showed the student, we helped him with scripting and helped him set up 3-point lighting and camera settings, audio settings, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, students who are really proactive, we're really interested in and really interested in supporting. Any opportunities for students to apply their learning is really important, that they can actually apply their learnings into the workplaces, learn from those learnings, and reflect on outcomes is something that we try and promote. Other things that we promote, professional learning networks. Australia and internationally are really important for learners to engage with. The field of learning design, it's a small world. I'm seeing some familiar faces in the group that's attended tonight or today. And so, yeah, networking is really important. We encourage students to, network amongst themselves and keep in contact. We've got a LinkedIn group that we get everyone to, that's open to anyone to join, called the Australian Association of Learning Designers. And so it's a great way to keep in contact with everybody after the course. And lastly, we recognise that, formal learning, it doesn't stop with the certificate at the end. It's continuous. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that we promote and we encourage all of our learners. So that's kind of a quick little summary from me about, formal learning that we do at UTS.
Thank you so much, John. That's very interesting to see that. Someone commented in the chat, great breadth and sort of the whole world of the profession in those micro credentials and in the degree. Thank you very much for that introduction.
Thank you.
And that moves very well to our next panelist's micro intro. So Stephen Abblitt works at Keypath, and we were particularly interested to invite Stephen today because of his presentation to ascilite at the end of last year about a novice learning design curriculum that they were developing there at Keypath. I'd hand over to Stephen. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. Yeah, I thought I'd just give us a quick sort of overview of our program. I guess I sort of represent the more sort of I don't know, workplace learning perspective, really. So for a bit of background, Keypath is an online program management company. We have about 13 university partners in Australia and Southeast Asia. We provide services across the whole sort of student life cycle, from program design and market research to marketing, recruitment, admissions, learning design, course development, ed tech. We do placement operations now and a lot of sort of student success support and things like that. I work as part of the learning design team, and part of my role involves training and development for the whole team, but particularly for our associate learning designers. Those are our sort of junior entry-level learning designers. We have a pretty big team of learning designers, around about 50 people, and some related sort of third space professionals as well, such as ed techs, web developers, and project managers. So in terms of the ALD role, I guess we needed to scale quite quickly, and learning designers are in high demand and can be a bit hard to find sometimes. So we created this associate learning designer role, which is intended to provide an entry-level pathway into the profession for those who are interested, I guess. People come into this sort of role with quite diverse educational and professional backgrounds. They have varying levels of expertise and experience in the fields of learning design and ed tech. Some people come from more sort of tech-focused roles. They've worked in higher ed or corporate learning or vet. We've got former academics. We've got a lot of teachers, former primary and secondary school teachers who come into the role. And we've got a lot of sort of other third space people, career counselors, academic skills types, all of those sorts of people coming into these roles. And I think that to me is quite indicative of the pathways a lot of learning designers take into their roles. There aren't those clear formal pathways that there might be in other older professions, let's say. I think these are the sort of challenges that we're facing in designing this program. I think the challenges for us are really compounded by the fact that learning design means different things in different contexts. And I think our profession can be quite hard to define. Eamon Costello talks about how we sort of toil at the interstices, and I think our role is often quite poorly understood. We have very diverse roles, we have very diverse job tasks, very different job titles. We come from, as I say, very different backgrounds professionally and educationally. We have quite different expertise and experience. Our field is also, as you've just seen from John's presentation, our field is immense and inherently multidisciplinary, and the breadth and depth of expertise we could possibly require can be a lot sometimes, especially at Keypath, where I think we ask a lot of our learning designers. Sometimes we ask them to be jacks of all trades, from high level conceptual design work through to content creation and media production and LMS builds and coding and quite complex work that covers quite a lot of sort of pedagogical and technological expertise, as well as all of those more important, let's say more important for want of a better term right now, consulting and sort of academic engagement skills and stakeholder management and project management skills. So I think the challenge for us is always that it's just such a big role. Where do you even start? I think, the other challenge as well, and I think Keith Heggett and Camille Dixon Dean pointed this out in their really good paper a few years ago, is that there's no real consensus at all on what learning designers should learn or how they should learn. So we tried to sort of set about answering some of these questions. About 12 months ago, we began a process of co-designing our training program. This was me leading the group of current ALDs. We sat down, we looked at job ads and various existing frameworks and competing programs such as the grad cert at UTS. We really wanted to establish the sort of foundational knowledge, skills, capabilities that learning designers need to succeed. We did a bit of a needs analysis. We looked at interviews and workshops with current and former ALDs from Keypath, and we built out some PLOs and developed a bit of a curriculum, conceptualized some design components such as micro-credentials, a portfolio, a mentoring framework, things like that. You can check out the ascilite paper from last year's conference if you'd like to hear more about that. What really interests me, though, is not so much what learning designers need to learn, but the question of how. And I think, our program is a work in progress, but for me, there are, I think, 4 key takeaways, and it's nice to see a bit of crossover with what John was just talking about with the grad cert. But for us, I think that the big sort of key takeaways are around 4 key things. Learner agency, so ensuring that learning is flexible and personalizable to meet the diverse learning needs and professional backgrounds of people who are coming into the field. It's about, to use a term from Gloria Delalba, it's becoming professional. It's about immersion in actual practice, which I think is one of the great strengths that we have as a training program that is built into a workplace, is that we do spend a lot of time exposing the novice learning designers to different work contexts. We spend a lot of time, we have such a big team. We let learning designers and associate learning designers collaborate quite a lot. There's lots of opportunities for shadowing and co-designing and just learning from other learning designers in situ. I think one of the biggest challenges is always, how do you teach that sort of situational thinking and cognitive flexibility that you need sometimes to react in different ways in design contexts, or when you're facilitating a workshop when you don't have the right answer at the right time, for example. So a big focus on immersion in practice. It can't just be theoretical. It needs to be applied, or it needs to be taught and applied in situ. And finally, I think the big thing that we're challenging ourselves with a bit at the moment is, we want to expose the associate learning designers to learning design practices and contexts outside of our own, because we work in such very specific ways. So how do we get them engaging and interacting with professional learning networks, professional learning communities, and expose them to different ways of working? As I say, these are all very specific to our organizational context and to our ways of working at Keypath. So I'm really interested in hearing from other people on this call and other panelists today. Are these sort of common challenges in your context? And I guess how applicable or viable are some of these ideas in an actual university setting? That's all from me. I think I'll pass back to Penny, actually.
Thank you, Stephen. So there's a question from the panelists to the panelists. We're going to change gear now. Jessica Frawley is a sorry, Jessica, you're a senior educational designer?
I'm a senior lecturer in
senior lecturer
portfolio. Yes.
So and I'm hoping, Jess, that you'll speak a little bit about the advanced HE aspect of professional development. Thank you so much, Jess.
Okay, thank you. I work in the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Education portfolio at University of Sydney. And what I'd like to show you today, so I'll quickly take over the share screen. It's not a slide deck, but I'm just going to guide you through a few tabs here. And if you want, a lot of the links in this won't work because they take you to internal places, but you can at least see the document. And let me just organize my screens. And so what we do at Sydney is we love to anchor professional development towards educators. And we use the word educators quite conspicuously because when we think about teachers, it often allows people to privilege sort of front of house lecturing or tutoring, and educators is a more inclusive and encompassing term. And maybe out there in the world, people might want to use the word teachercators.
Just interrupting, Jessica, we're looking at the wrong screen for you.
Sorry.
No.
Redo.
No, the bad double screens.
Oh dear.
The bad double screens. But I mean, there was nothing bad in what you were sharing. So currently we're looking at the browser. Yeah.
Let's have another go at this. There's too many screens. I should have, right, there we go. This is a bit better.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. So nothing like live Zoom. Okay, so the idea around professional development for educators is that we're trying in all of our programs to have shared professional learning that can be taken by educational leaders in faculty, academics, educational designers, educational technologists, across schools and faculties. So in terms of the way that the pathways that we have to do that work, is we align things with the UK PSF. So we're accredited with Advanced HE as a strategic partner, and we have several sort of pathways. So we have for those who are early in their career, they can either go through the modular professional learning framework. That doesn't lead you immediately to a category of fellowship because you're just starting out in your first year. And then as you go up, you can do the modular professional learning framework. You can do the Sydney Educational Fellowship Program, which is the award mechanism for granting fellowships from associate fellowship all the way to senior fellowship. So we're accredited for D1 to D3 of the UK PSF. And then we also have formal award opportunities, including the Sydney Professional Certificate in Foundations in Higher Education. So a bit of a mouthful, but basically that's half of a grad cert. It's literally half of a grad cert. So our grad cert has 4 units of study, and the Sydney Professional Certificate has 2 units of study, and you also get associate fellowship by doing that. both the Sydney Professional Certificate and the Graduate Certificate are accredited taught programs. So our Graduate Certificate is accredited to D2 of the UK PSF, and the Sydney Professional Certificate D1 of the UK PSF. So they're giving us, and they're both open to academics teaching in faculties, educational designers, academic librarians. They're very inclusive, and as a result of that, they're actually very hard to accredit, because the way that taught programs are accredited in the UK often involves smaller numbers of, say, 25 to 30 going through a graduate certificate. They're all predominantly lecturers, and they have some sort of peer observation baked into the program. But obviously we can't do that when we're having 50 to 100 go through our grad cert program, and they're coming from a much more diverse pool of roles. So we offer, I think the main ways that we think about how to professionally develop staff across the university in advisor roles, but also in tutor, lecturer, course coordinator, program coordinator roles, is that we try and have shared community and spaces for that. So we don't, there are moments where we can separate out people and say this might be more relevant to your role and less relevant to another, but generally we try and have shared spaces, because I think the conversations between staff members in working in different roles is really important. So I'll quickly show you what our modular professional learning framework looks like. And this is basically each pathway is completed by 12 different modules, and there are different combinations of modules, and we have an educational designer and support officer pathway. But often, with the exception of a particular module, I think it's module 17, which is the educational designer community of practice, you can see just above the little black box there. Most of those other sessions, you've got mixed groups of staff from different levels, different perspectives, all sharing their practice and engaging in CPD together. So that's one thing. So at the delivery point of our CPD programs, we're in shared spaces, we're having shared discussions. And I think this is really important for those who are teaching in the faculties to understand how rich an understanding and how much of an important role the educational designers, educational developers, educational technologists have by being there and seeing that expertise together in that shared space. So that's one thing that's really important. A second thing that's really important is that with the Sydney Educational Fellowship Programme, so this is how we award associate fellowship, fellowship, and senior fellowship. This program, I direct this program, but I co-direct it with an educational design manager. So it's a program that's co-steered by both an academic perspective and an educational design perspective, so that we're trying to create a program that is genuinely inclusive for all. And because we have the way we award fellowship is through panels of fellows who are just trained to be assessors from across all the faculties, we have mixed panels. So we will have educational designers assessing at Descriptor 3 senior fellowship. We'll have educational technologists assessing at Descriptor 2. We'll have them mentoring, and we have a really nice development approach for our educational designers, academics, librarians, anyone who wants to contribute to assessing and mentoring other staff can do so. So I think it's about building not only shared spaces at the participant level in CPD, but also in the provision of that. So MPLF, the Sydney Educational Fellowship Programme are both co-delivered by staff of different educators, basically. So it's never just, oh, we'll only let academics speak. It's about recognizing the richness of experience and giving agency and leadership opportunities to people. And in terms of our success in using fellowship and the UK PSF framework to ground and orientate that professional learning, I think one of the really key things that works is it's one framework that accounts for lots of different ways of doing educational work. So I think it gives us a sort of shared currency in language through which to talk about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, you know, the activities, the knowledge, the values that we bring to work. And it gives us concrete recognition that other people can see. We started, I was involved in the first pilot of a fellowship program at Sydney, which we started in 2016 with a small group of 20 staff who were just going to give it a go going through advanced HE. And since then we've become accredited. We had a few years of capacity building, and we've now just ticked over 600 fellows awarded at the university across different categories. So it's, I think it's really valuable in terms of how it works for, some of the perceived opportunities and risks that I see when you're having those shared spaces. I think sometimes we get feedback in things like the modular professional learning framework, where some educational developer staff will say, oh, but I don't really do this in my job. Do I need to be in this module? And we would come back and say, but the staff you're assisting have to know this, so you also need to know this. And likewise, we sometimes see on the assessment panels, academic assessors saying, well, I don't understand how the work that this person does is descriptor 2 or is descriptor 3, and having those opportunities to discuss that education isn't just what you do in your faculty, but it's what other people are doing in different places. The assessment process can be a really powerful way of facilitating those discussions about how is education looking outside of my worldview, whether that's the role or the faculty or the school or whatever it is that is sort of constraining that idea of what education can be. So I think that's all I had. Now I've managed to successfully share my screen after years on Zoom. So thank you for bearing with me on that.
No, Jess, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for talking about that and for explaining it, those relationships between everybody involved in the education task at Sydney. That was really interesting, particularly to me. I'm also involved in work to do with my university's fellowships with Advanced HE. So really interesting to see how Sydney handles it there. Thank you, Jess, very much. Now it's my great pleasure to hand over the final panellist, Colin Simpson, who also works at the University of Sydney, is our TELedvisor convener, and has, I think, come to take on the EdTech part of our rich TELedvisor universe. Or perhaps, Colin, you have something else in mind. Please go on.
Well, I thought I'd actually kind of spin off a little bit from what Jess has been talking about with the HEA fellowships, because last year I actually successfully applied for the senior fellow HEA, and I have spoken to a few people in recent times who are sort of working through the process, and it can be a little bit daunting. So I thought I'd just very quickly spin us through how I approach this and what I put into my own application. So one of the reasons that I actually, I'm assuming you can see my slides? Yes. Yeah,
It's
great.
beautiful. Thank you.
One of the reasons that I actually sort of have gone through this process is, I mean, there's a range of reasons that we actually do professional development. In this case, I think that it's actually really valuable just in terms of establishing your credibility in a field. I'm seeing more and more people putting the post-nominal sort of up in their presence. I think the fellowship of the Higher Education Academy has a little bit of sort of credibility these days. It is a fairly involved process, and it will take a few months to actually work through. What you're doing is you're really documenting your practice, your experience. And so I really just kind of started with finding everything that I do and everything that I've kind of got evidence for. And honestly, I'm going to whiz through these. So, but in the learning design and development field, in teaching, ed tech projects that I've worked on, what I've done in writing, professional development, engagement with the community. And then I sort of started trying to map these things to the actual areas of activity, the core knowledge things, the values, and all of the descriptors which you're meant to be writing to as you actually work through this process. I didn't have a clear sense of how it was all going to fit together, because essentially what you need to do in your application, you do a little bit of a blurb about your own context, just kind of explaining who you are, what it is that you're doing. And, that's fairly short. It's just setting the scene. Move on, have a bit of a discussion of your teaching philosophy. And, that can kind of be anything. And I love to bandy about this William Gibson quote from Neuromancer, because it kind of speaks to the flexibility and the adaptability that I think we need as educators. And that's kind of at the foundation of my own personal philosophy. From there, you need to write about 4,000 words of reflective narrative, which address all of those different kind of criteria. And I kind of managed to break it up into about 4 different sections. So I discussed, how I work to develop digital learning environments. Now, I believe that's actually changed in the framework. So the descriptor that addressed that specifically has evolved a little bit, but I'm sure you can still make that work if that's something that you work in. And I will note that, look, I've previously I've done learning design work, I've done academic development, but I guess in recent years, I've had a very heavy focus on the education technology side, which can be a little bit more challenging because you're doing less teaching and it's more about creating the practice architectures that people need to support, good teaching practice and create opportunities for that to occur. So it can be particularly difficult as an ed tech. But in that, I'm doing a lot of evaluation, talking about the lessons that I've learnt. Obviously, you do still run a lot of training. So I went through, obviously, particularly during the pandemic, we ran a buttload of workshops about how you move on to Zoom and how you start using Teams and all of these other bits and pieces. And, being good data collectors that we were getting, ratings and feedback on the sessions. And so that all went into the application as well. Obviously, I'm doing my own, sort of research on how edvisors and everything work together. So that was fantastic just in terms of demonstrating my engagement with professional development. And also just how you contribute to the wider community. And how you learn from it, what you're putting in, what you're taking out. And I think there's actually a new section in the PSF about basically collaborating with others. So it's, it's kind of, these things are evolving slightly, and ideally, you'll be in an institution where you can work with mentors and you've got people sort of supporting you through this process. I have spoken to a few people who are trying to do this independently, and I know that's a real challenge. And I am very keen for us in the TELedvisors network to offer whatever support that we can to people. I will share my application in our Teams environment a little bit later on that you can sort of read through and just see, you know, what a successful one looks like. So once you've done your reflective narrative, then you also need to just do 2 case studies, which is kind of just a longer form of, you know, telling a story, what you did, what you learned from it, how that sort of shapes your practice. Again, you know, the pandemic has been a wealth of, you know, experience just in terms of us having to do a lot of stuff. So I was heavily involved in the implementation of Teams, and I had another project relating to revisiting how we actually use video in learning and teaching. You need to throw in some supporting statements, and my former boss, Trev, and Penny wrote some very lovely words, and I'm very grateful. And I had some very good support from mentors within the institution, Faraz Majumdar and Katie Hughes. So that was kind of my journey through the process. So look, it takes a while. Reflective writing is a fairly specific skill set. And I really encourage you as well, if you've got the opportunity, to get involved in assessing other people's submissions, because you just learn so much about how other people think about teaching. And that was really nice. So yeah, that's just a little bit about the HEA fellowships from a applicant perspective.
Thank you, Colin, very much. That's great to hear, that practical experience. We've got still 15 minutes in our session, and traditionally the TELedvisor webinars leak into a little bit later time period, but anybody who needs to go, of course, can ignore that cultural norm. But there's been a great deal of chat, a lot of appreciation for each of the panelists' work and approach to professional development. And I just thank them very much for keeping us as an audience in mind with those examples. If anybody would like to put their hand up, we'd be very happy to hear from you. But just looking back through the questions in the chat, Wendy, perhaps I could ask Wendy's question to Jess. How do you see so Wendy's question is, what was the push to create an internal qualification? I think that was to Jess, right, Wendy?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so you can just, in terms of funding, how people get awarded fellowship, you can just allow funds so that individuals can pay individually to be assessed by Advanced HE, you know, by one of their own panels. I think one of the draw cards for strategic membership with Advanced HE is that institutionally you get to own it. So that's awarding internally, training people to be assessors internally, training people to be mentors internally, giving an institutional identity and flavor to how you want to do it. So I know other institutions are doing things like where they have a portfolio that you submit, or there's a really innovative approach coming out of the LIFT program, which is Central Queensland University and University of Southern Queensland merged to have a shared program where the application is submitted on Padlet and the context statement is a video. So you have some sort of creative input, and especially when you're doing accredited, where you're accrediting a taught pathway like a graduate certificate, you can't just go direct to AHE. You have to work with advanced HE to accredit that particular program. And in terms of our numbers, the highest number of descriptor 2 FHEA, so the fellow category, comes from our talk pathway. So it's worth doing it, even if well, it's been worth doing it for us, even if the management and the writing of that particular accredited part of the program was probably the trickiest in terms to get through. But the assessment, I think, to go back to what Colin said about sitting on an assessment panel and learning about the framework and what is a standard of quality education and educational practice. What does that look like in the conservatorium? What does that look like in first year biology? What does that look like for someone in educational policy? That's awesome. Like, I love that. I love sitting on the panels, and that's something you get to do when you have your own internal pathway.
Thank you, Jess, very much. I had a question. Could I ask Stephen, when you're, do you learn from each other sort of in a more formal sense? I gave the example of coding. So somebody who knows coding in the team, do they take on the sort of teaching role, or do they direct others to external sources, or do you organize, how do you organize that?
I think it's one of the benefits of having a really large team of learning designers, and I see Hans nodding, and he did some work on this with us, with Hans Telstra, when he was with Keypath. I think the breadth of expertise in the team means that people are allowed to specialize in those sorts of areas. So we do have a lot of people who have very specific expertise in very different aspects of learning design. Coding is a good example, but design facilitation or assessment design or whatever, so that we are really trying as much as we can to leverage that expertise and through various sort of opportunities to share practice and collaborate on design, but also through, you know, just running some basic training sessions. But I think, yeah, I think it's certainly a strength of the way the team is set up at the moment. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Question from Cameron in the chat, the last chat item, asking about how, for Jess, probably, how do the faculty and the central unit work together on that?
In a range of ways. Okay,
yes.
So we know how different it is to be an educational designer, academic developer in a faculty. It's good because it's going to vary highly with what that faculty permits and how much autonomy they allow to just the individual to take up different opportunities, or what things are allowed or not. So in terms of how we position ourselves programmatically and centrally, we do have faculty EDs who talk into some of our programs. So Sam Haley from Science, she's an educational design manager. She used to run one of the modular professional learning framework modules, and so she designed that, and we acknowledge her in the work on that. She used to run workshops for us. Equally, we need to be for sustainability, we need to be a bit cautious, because you can't resource programs in that way, because someone says, well, hey, we're paying for this person. You can't just take them away and get them running your central programs and workshops. So it's highly dependent on the individual, but we do have relationships with educational designers in different faculties who sit on panels, who go to training, who co-facilitate with us, and I think that's that would be the ideal way of working. But you know, it just varies dependent on person, role, and place.
Thank you, Jess. We were talking earlier about how the design of the programs, each of these designs, demonstrates different elements of fabulous learning design practice. Colin was commenting about how that can serve. Colin, would that be right? How that serves as a model for the people that we're working with? So I think we've seen that Jess's comment there about making the education project much more broad than just the unit, than just the central unit, is a great example of cross-institutional working, I guess. And John has also pointed out how his program reaches out into the workplace as well. So those features of the design that allow a more sort of porous engagement with the whole field, I guess that is a way of encouraging future proofing in the offering. Would that be right? I'm so interested, John, in that idea that you were happily presenting a future trends micro. That really struck me. Yeah.
No, absolutely, and it's one of the most updated subjects that we have in our offerings. You know, we have AI content that's outdated every month. Having kind of your finger on the pulse to industry is really important. I call it ivory tower learning design. If you're, you know, a learning designer, you think, oh, the clients are going to love this. And the same with our course. We don't have that connection to industry and a finger on the pulse in terms of what is emerging in industry, what is industry asking for, then we've kind of dropped the ball in terms of our offerings.
Colin's got a question there in the chat. Colin, why don't you speak it?
Oh, crazy. Yeah, look, I mean, I think I really enjoyed hearing what John and Stephen and Jess had to say about the professional development that we provide to get people up to speed, particularly as, you know, third space practitioners. I'm wondering if, and this is, I guess, a question for the panel, but also I'm curious if people in the chat want to respond. I'm wondering if there are things that you think aren't covered in those kind of programs that we need to know as practitioners. And in the pre-chat before the session, I was sort of chatting with Amy about how to play nicely with IT, as an example. Did anyone? The floor's open.
I often get asked, because I actually sit on the board for the Australian Institute of Training and Development, so that also looks at corporate training, and I get often asked by learning designers trying to make a transition into corporate education how to make that switch. And there's definitely a different level of thinking and more strategic planning that's required in those areas. So you've got your IT things, you've got strategy, there's a whole different range of skills depending on the industry you're working in. So I think, yeah, depends on where you're positioning the question.
Dealing with higher education culture, I think, would probably be something.
I wanted to ask Stephen that actually. You were saying how learning design has the whole panel was demonstrating learning design means different things to different people. I'm wondering how the universities cope with working with the OPM, with understanding the roles that are available to them there in the projects that you're working with them.
It's certainly probably our biggest sort of ongoing challenge. Every time you start a new development, you go in and you talk about roles and responsibilities and what learning design actually is. And no, we're not just going to sit down and write a list of topics and write some content. We're going to go through an actual, you know, quite long design process that might feel painful at times, but that is worth it in the end. And how do you, I guess, get people on board and on board into that process? I think that is a really hard part of the work for us, particularly just often explaining to faculty what they're doing, what it is that we're doing with these sorts of programs, because it is quite different to what they're used to and very different to the typical semester trimester model. I think generally a lot of the hidden stuff is around those sort of consulting skills, the stakeholder management, the project management, those sorts of things that are quite, I think leaving universities to go to Keypath, I think has taught me that those things are really, really important. And if I, you know, had my time again in universities, I think a lot of those skills would be really, really valuable. I think the other things, going back to what John was saying, I think the biggest thing that we're teaching is sort of mindsets around, I keep thinking of Ronald Barnett and learning from an unknown future. You know, our field is changing so much. AI is a great example of that. How are we teaching our learning designers to succeed now, but to succeed in 5 and 10 and 20 years time when the new AI is here, and how we're teaching them to learn those new tools and to use them ethically and effectively. I think that's one of the big hidden things in the learning design curriculum is that learning to learn aspect often.
Thank you, Stephen. Yep, nods from around the room. Thank you. Well, we've seen some beautiful examples of well-developed professional development programs, and also really appreciate hearing from Jess and Colin about the way that we as TELedvisors might document our work, might develop our work and document our work in a fellowship context. We haven't really picked up major topics for our webinars, so people who've got thoughts about what we should be looking for right now, please add that to the chat, or also in our team space. And if anybody wants to be added to our team space, please just let us know. We can, I think we should probably close off the webinar now, but yes, with the idea that we'll still be hanging here for a little while. And if everyone would please join with me in thanking all 4 members of our panel who've given us a tremendous overview of their area of the universe. I think it's all around. And yes, we really appreciate you taking the time to tell us about that work in the field. Thank you.